Hi everybody, Miss Beth here at the Vandergrift Museum again. This week we'll be talking about the Foundry and the mill. What you're looking at here is a display of a mill sample cart from the mill here in Vandergrift, where when it was a sheet mill, they would roll the sheets out and they would take samples of each batch to make sure that the chemical composition was correct and that the sheets were coming off the rolls in the proper manner and there weren't any defects that would cause them to not work the way they were supposed to. Take a little closer view. We have a lunch box from the time, which everybody had to eat lunch at their work, no going home, unless you were a boss, probably. We have a helmet from someone named Shorty. It belonged to John Shorty Urban, and it was signed by all those he worked with when he retired from the Vandergrift plant of U.S. Steel in 1970. You can see the signatures on it. We also have some tongs, some of the tools that were used in handling the sheet steel. They're made out of cast iron. They're not exactly light. They use these to guide the steel from one roll to another to make sure it was getting the proper dimensions. This thing that looks like a big sword or a knife is a shearman's knife. They used it to cut the steel. Got some steel-toed shoes, which you can see still have metal on them. And then we have a number of different oil cans that were used to keep the machinery in working order. Without the mill, there would be no Vandergrift. Vandergrift was built because of the mill to house the workers. This is some of those sample carts in use that you saw just previously. And these are some of the directors of Apollo Iron and Steel in 1897. Of course, the always popular danger sign. Didn't want to get hit by the crane, especially if it was carrying a load of steel. Here's some silverware from the American Sheet and Tin Plate Company. They had their own cafeteria. Here's a ID badge that belonged to one of the workers. Here's a portion of the first sheet rolled at Vandergrift, October 29th, 1895, for the Apollo Iron and Steel Company. Now, if you remember, ground was broken for the plant and the town. The first ground was broken May the 5th, 1895. So that was a pretty quick turnaround. There's a mill crew holding those tongs we were talking about. You can see they're quite long. Here's a ladle that was used, no doubt, to sample the metal mix and make sure it had the right components. And another kind of tongs in the back. Or big wrenches for the tools or for the equipment, and also another mill crew there in the back. You'll see some more of the mill crew pictures later on today. This is a mill crew from February 1st, 1946. They still have some of the same equipment. Another caution sign from when the mill was called Carnegie, Illinois Steel in the 30s. Bottle opener from U.S. Steel. A cutting device. Here's a picture, a very early picture of the mill looking across from North Vandergrift. This is Vandergrift designed a new kind of steel called Core 10, the name being taken from corrosion resistant and higher tensile strength. And it is used for many construction projects nowadays. The first roll of steel, the first rolling of that steel was done in 1932. It's one of the most popular proprietary steel grades ever, and one whose name is recognized as synonymous with weathering steels. You can see some of the projects it's been used in. The New River Gorge Bridge, Deere and Company Bridge in Moline, Illinois, U.S. Steel Building in Pittsburgh, PA, Los Angeles Freeway Overpass, California, Mount Hope College, Michigan, transmission towers. There's the first Core 10 steel hopper car. And here's an actual piece of the first from the original heat from 1932. Now we'll move on to the Foundry department. Originally, the Foundry was the Foundry department of the Apollo Iron and Steel Company. But later it was taken over by a company called United Engineering and Foundry. So we have a little picture here of kind of a foundry works in the more recent days. The Foundry made all the components that were needed to roll the steel. They made the rolls, they made the brackets that held it. Here's a picture of the Foundry. It was flooded during the 1936 flood. That's what it looked like when it wasn't underwater. And here's several badges from workers. They do have names on them. Robert Maxwell and John E. Kenitis. A card of accounts. We have a lunch bucket from a Foundry worker. A railroad lantern, because both the mill and the Foundry depended greatly on the railroad to move their products. And here are some other small tools that were used in the Foundry. Another sample ladle, a little shovel, a wrench, an optical pyrometer. I couldn't begin to tell you what that does. So this is just a quick overview here of the mill and the Foundry. The mill needed the Foundry in order to have the equipment to roll the steel. Now we'll go upstairs and see some more photographs of both places. And another little glimpse at some more of our collection here at Vandergrift Historical Society. Okay, we're going to do the Foundry first. This is a picture of the works of the Foundry in 1901. I'll get back further so you can see the whole thing. It was quite extensive and quite large. This picture, I don't know how well you can see it, is the largest steel roll ever made at the time. It was in the 1972. And the shipping weight of it was 530,000 pounds. And it was shipped to a rolling mill in Illinois. Here's another slightly smaller casting that was rolled at our mill. Another interesting fact about our Foundry is that here's Tony Lorenzo Basil, who worked at the Foundry from 1920 to 1940. He's loading some sort of a cart there. This is a view of the Foundry from across the river, probably about where North Apollo is now. The Foundry here in Vandergrift made the castings, made the hinges for the locks on the Panama Canal. Here's a picture of the works going on inside the Foundry. Since they did a lot of casting, there were many of the great big steel ladles full of hot metal. It was probably a very dangerous place to work. And this is a picture of a presentation to a gentleman who was retiring as a boss of the mill in 1916. And all the workers came out. Of course, unfortunately, we have no names on this, except that the person who was getting the being honored was W.E. Troutman, the manager of this Foundry at the time. I'm sure some of you probably have ancestors in this picture. Give you a little glimpse of our children's display area, toys and games of long ago. Be sure to come and visit when we open. This is Vandergrift Works of Vandergrift plant, furnace number 11, 1954. This is Lee North, A.H. Hoover, C.D. Dunmeyer, and J.W. Lotfer. This is another shot of inside the mill. which we're fortunate to have these photos because it's not someplace they just let civilians in to stomp around. This is Jesse Griffiths on the left. On the right is Henry McComb, and Jesse Griffiths is purchasing $4,000 worth of 7th War loan bonds from Henry McComb. Mr. Griffiths is a maintenance man at the machine shop at the Vandergrift plant of the Carnegie, Illinois Steel Corporation, Irwin Works. He was first employed at the local plant December 28, 1911, and has worked in the machine shop since 1917. PFC Caleb J. Griffiths, his only son, is now serving with the U.S. Army in Germany. Before his induction in 1943, Private Griffiths worked in the finishing department of the Vandergrift plant. So this was presented by Mr. Griffiths' family. Here's an aerial shot of Vandergrift showing the mill here in the lower corner, in the lower right-hand corner, and the foundry is up here in the other little point of land there that comprises Vandergrift. This is one of the work crews at the Vandergrift mill. 1913, it would have been American Sheet and Tin Plate Company at that time. So for as long as Vandergrift has been here, the mill has been here under some name. It's not been the same name all that time, but some more mill crews. You're going to see some more of these too. Probably if you've been in Vandergrift. And here's a more modern view of the mill rolling steel. We've all seen those trucks carrying the coils. And they even honored people or gave their employees clothing with their brand on it. Now we'll go look at some other pictures. We have so many really good pictures of both the mill and the foundry that we can't hang them all up at one time. So we're going back to the library, and we're going to look at the foundry pictures first. First, I'll show you, this is a drawing and specifications for one of those big steel rolls that I showed you right here. The big long skinny one. So the steel, they put two of these together and the steel would roll between them to make it flat and the same size the whole way across. So, now to me this looks very complicated. I apologize for the magnets. But the thing that caught my eye was over here. Eccentricity must not exceed 0.0005 inch. That is pretty darn close work for something that big. So you get a kind of a drawing idea of what they were making. These are the rolls to roll the steel. Here's a few other pictures. We don't have as many pictures of the foundry as we do the mill. Here it says American Sheet and Tin Plate Company Engine Men. No names. This was very early though, judging by the clothing that they're wearing in the buildings. This is another item they have rolled, or a set of rolls they've made there at the foundry. And this one's obviously for cutting bar steel. Since it's cut, you can see the holes where the bar would go through. It would be formed into a bar, either round or like a more rectangular shape. This is another one of those big rolls. I believe the thing the gentleman is putting on it is some sort of a caliper to measure the size, but I'm not positive. And this is the roll after they have it wrapped up and ready to go. It's sitting on a rail car. That would have to be how they transported them. They'd be too heavy for any truck. And so they wrapped it all up and packaged it very neatly and carefully so nothing would break off on the way. And that was how they shipped them out from the foundry. Sometimes they were only going to Vandergrift. Sometimes they were going to the Panama Canal. This one was probably going to Illinois. Now, for the Vandergrift mill, at the time it was built, it was a really big deal. People flocked here from all over the world, literally, to work at the mill because the conditions were good And the wages were really good for the time. I have here a payroll. Here's a payroll from the Foundry department. And you can see back here, we got some of the probably more skilled labor guys that maybe were doing the calibrations and whatnot. We're getting 41 cents a day, 35 cents a day. And they were working 117 hours in 2 weeks, or over 100 hours, most all of them in 2 weeks. So a little longer days than we have now. So their paychecks would average, you can see over here, like $50 tops, close to $50. Like I said, these are probably the more skilled labor. And we'll flip back here. And these are probably the general laborers. You see 15 cents an hour, 15, 20, 20, 17. That was probably a good, these were good wages for the time. This one gentleman, you can see that Bruno Maruca worked 140 hours that week, 120. For their paychecks are still very small. But everything was cheaper then, so people were thrilled to get that money. There was a time when they would get day labor every day. People would line up at the gate, and the bosses would pick who was going to work that day. Some days you got work, some days you didn't. And we're back to the smaller. I think this one looks like they put the bosses at the top and going on down to the people that were getting the lesser rates. But it was good work. The whole payroll for the 2 weeks here was $586 for this page. There's an additional, this says addition of 10 cents a day on molders working. So apparently they got a, molders working on or before July 1st to July 28th. So these people got a 10 cents a day raise the month of July. But like I said, the hours they worked and the wages they were getting paid are just, we can't imagine, but it was a different time. We also have here a census from the Vandergrift mill. It's broken up by departments. This is the sheet mill. And you'll see that it says the person's name, the job that they do, their nationality, and where they live. Now you see on here it says Apollo, Apollo, Apollo. When McMurtry first built the town in the mill, he didn't want anybody to live outside of Vandergrift that worked at the mill. But naturally, over time, that became impossible. And they had to bring people in from other. He actually built a big fence between Vandergrift and East Vandergrift to try to keep people from coming up from East Vandergrift to apply for work at the mill. But that didn't last too long. So here we have another list. This is the warehouse and finishing, including the acid plant. Now here, they have the list of names, and they have gone like Austrian. And this says, for the immigrants, it says if they are naturalized or not. And on this page, it appears that none of them were naturalized yet. All of this, the foundry and the mill both, was hard, heavy work. Again, a whole page of nobody who's naturalized yet. White warehouse, electric lab, and acid plant. Most of these are from 1917. And here you're getting more of a mix. And this also shows the residents And you see so many from East Vandergrift, so you know the fence was not a good plan. Now that you've seen some names, let's look at some faces. We have this book that is a compilation of photos taken of every mill crew in 1917. Some of them have names, some of them don't. You may have ancestors who lived here and worked here and or show up in these pictures. Again, you can see the tools. Of course, I get one that doesn't. The tools like we have downstairs on the sample bar. There's the long tongs. More guys with tongs. And you can see it was hard, heavy work, and they were dressed appropriately for it. They all have on the heavy boots. I'm guessing they just probably called them off their crew when it was their turn for the picture, and they went right back to work when it was over. Sometimes they did take pictures in a studio setting. These people are all like the higher echelon workers at the mill, the roller, heater, pair heater, rougher, catcher, doubler, matcher, shearman, and opener. They were in charge of pouring the steel and opening the hearth and doing all the like more complicated, dangerous tasks. I don't have a date on this photo, but you can see the names. Okay, we'll look at some pictures of inside the mill. Here's a picture that anybody who grew up here probably remembers seeing. The smokestacks and the mill office looking down Grand Avenue. Here's a smaller one from a little bit different angle. This is the scrap yard where they would load scrap up inside the mill. Again, we're lucky to have these photographs donated by people who work there and some from the mill itself. The mill it was like its own little world. Here's the mill fire department with their hose carts behind them. Here's one of the giant ladles pouring steel. This is a close-up view inside of the foundry during the flood. That's out of place slightly. This is the rail yard of the mill back in the day. And it looks like the mill was actually like a small town. It had its own hospital, it had its own cafeteria, it had its own blacksmith, it had its own everything that you could need or want to fix anything or make anything. They had it within their own company. Here's an aerial picture. And you can see it does look like a small town. This is a picture, early picture. This is the blacksmith at the mill. You'll see he has a lot of horseshoes there, because they used horses to pull everything down to the railroad stations and whatnot and around the mill. And they also made tools, the tongs and whatnot that men used. These are some more photos of inside the mill. That's a ladle being heated. Here's the men using some of the tools that we've seen to damper and undamper the furnaces beneath the ladles to heat the steel. This is where a open hearth furnace, they were relining it. That big ladle laying on its side is scheduled to be relined as well. After a while, the heat does tell, I guess. Here's a gentleman with he was a craneman or a craneman's assistant because the hook is from a crane. This gentleman is helping the crew clean out and reline. Here's some of the product, rolled sheet steel, coils. These ladies worked in the office during World War II. I have names. These ladies all worked in the shipping office during World War II. Bottom row, left to right. Cleta White, Loretta Manganello, Ruth Solinger, Margaret Rinkaus, Margie Crosley, top row, left to right, Caroline Mowry Guckenberger, Amelia Condini, Nancy Giada Arteritano, Velma Sibic, Teresa Fontana Morabito, and Joan Brustinski. So they were doing their part for the war effort. Not only did the mill have its own cafeteria, hospital, etc., etc., they also had their own baseball teams. Fortunately, we don't have any ID, but here are two of the baseball teams that they fielded. We also have in our sports room at least one trophy from that a mill baseball team won. And we also have over here a few more pictures from more recent days of the mill. Here's when it was Allegheny Ludlam steel. Here's the modern rolling. See, there's no tongs involved. It's all automated. This is also, I believe this is a furnace. This big long contraption here. This picture is from 1967. It shows the Vandergrift plant of U.S. Steel, silicone expansion. Looking into the annealing department. Number 1, the former electric sheet anneal and pickling removed and semi-finished coil anneal storage completed. So those are all semi-finished. They may be going elsewhere to be completely finished, or they might be picked up and taken elsewhere in our mill. And the mill's always been big in the community and helped out. And they, like I said, they had the baseball teams, and they would help out in the early years if there was food drives or during the war to sell bonds and such. And during the centennial in 1976, the bicentennial, this was their float. Vandergrift U.S. Steel, it was U.S. Steel at the time, through history, 1895 to 1976. So, that's the story of Vandergrift's mill, without which there would be no town. I hope you enjoyed this, and next time we'll be talking about various stores and businesses. Thank you. Goodbye.